The first of our series devoted to helping our partners grow what the industry estimates to be an $129 billion industry by 2025, and that is security. So for today's webinar, Upsell Your SMB Customers with Security, we have some special guests from Microsoft. We have Emmy Yeager, Senior PMM SMB Security, and David.
Yeah, good.
And David Bierman-Burr, Security Architect, also joining us, as well as myself, Brianna Lau, Growth Solutions Lead for Seamless Security here at Ingram Micro. So before we get started, this webcast is live and is currently being streamed on Teams webinar. So if you wish to share this webcast with a colleague or you want to re-listen on demand, the same link that you used to join today is the same one that you'll be using for future reference. This deck is going to be sent to all attendees as this webcast ends. So if you are here with us live today, please use the Q&A window or chat window to ask any questions that you might have about what's being presented. But we will be leaving some time for you to come off mute at the end and ask some of the questions that you have from the content presented today. So in today's agenda, we'll be focusing on the why security and why focus on it with Microsoft. We'll also be talking more about the M365 SMB security value proposition and overviewing from a sales motion what to talk about from that point of view. We're going to have a customer conversation on security and go into some of those common customer objections that you might see when engaging in a sales conversation around security with Microsoft. We'll be closing with some next steps that are a great value proposition from Microsoft and Ingram to help you close leads around Microsoft security. And then we'll open it up to Q&A and close the webinar from that on. So to kick it off, I wanted to introduce our attendees to what we believe will be the areas of growth for partners. Here at Ingram, we've become extremely growth obsessed in helping our partners organize and define the focus areas of where we believe we can drive optimized business outcomes and accelerated growth. And our mission is entirely focused on becoming very customer centric and leading with solutions customers are demanding for. So in narrowing that approach, we've focused on 4 pillars of where we call growth solutions focus areas. The first one being modern cloud platforms, which is estimated to be a $426 billion industry by 2025. And in those specific areas, leading with app modernization and data and insights. The second is seamless security or cybersecurity, which is estimated to be a $129 billion industry by 2025. With solutions growing at a faster rate like endpoint security, identity security, and security operations. The third, connected workplace, leaning into collaboration apps, virtual desktops, and digital experiences. And then lastly, business performance, which is looking at CRM, ERP, low code, no code, workforce automation. So speaking specifically on the growth solutions opportunity for cybersecurity, we know that from our research, again, by 2025, it's estimated to grow at a very fast and high CAGR growth compared to other growth industries, with that expected to grow at $129 billion by 2025. And we know that within security, endpoint is going to be the highest spending area with customers. Around 50% of organizations are going to be looking at a managed detection and response tool by 2025. So thus pointing to the importance of not only owning endpoint detection tools, but also leveraging people and machine learning to actively monitor and remediate those threats. And of course, we've all seen it, but the skill shortage for qualified security professionals will be a factor in how customers and partners act in this growth solutions category, thus putting a greater reliance on partners like MSPs to provide managed services to supplement where there is technical skilling shortage. So when we look into the areas of growth for security, endpoint, identity, security operations, we really look at solutions like Microsoft 365 as a way to empower organizations to do more with less. We've seen from our partner organizations, those who work with Ingram, that they're using security tooling included in subscriptions like Microsoft 365 Business Premium to help their customers achieve compliance around endpoint and identity security. And it's really no surprise that with Microsoft Security gaining some of its notoriety in various Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester Wave reports as a leader in spaces like endpoint, access management, and data security platforms, that this is kind of that first step into that security space with customers that they already own. There's also other reasons like helping organizations meet CIS controls with Microsoft 365 Business Premium, helping customers achieve implementation group 1 within CIS, and also provide that measurability around their security posture at a price point that actually undercuts some of the third-party tools that can come in at more than what a Microsoft 365 Business Premium is valued at, $22 per month per user. And so this is a really great tool when considering security to lean into Microsoft 365 as that first foray for your customers. So with that, I'd love to bring on our guest, Emmy, because we'd love to talk more about some of the value propositions of Microsoft 365 in detail. And I'd love Emmy to kick that off in helping use Business Premium as a way to upsell and retain your existing customers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brianna, and I hope that everyone can hear me well. My name is Emmy, and I'm joined in this webinar with my colleague, David, and we both work at Microsoft. I work with SMB Security Go-to-Market, and David is a security architect. And today we're going to talk to you about how you can upsell and retain customers leading with security. And we will focus on two main perspectives today. The first one is upselling our existing productivity customers, so our installed base using Business Basic or Business Standard, for instance, to Business Premium or falling back and attaching Defender for Business. But then again, we also want to make sure that we also touch on the Business Premium customers, because we last year instated the first price increase ever on Business Premium, and there are still customers renewing that will see the price increase for the first time. So it is also important to go back to those customers and position the continuously added value that we have been adding on. For instance, most recently with Defender for Business, we have added audio conferencing and so much more. We wanted to start from a customer perspective. What do SMB customers actually want? Actually, 64% of SMB buyers prefer to purchase a package or a suite of solutions that can actually meet all of their business needs. And security is, of course, an important part of that. And when we think about how to help SMBs to meet their technology needs, there are many ways to do that. One way is, of course, to purchase different kind of third-party solutions to meet the different customer needs. That route often gets very difficult to integrate. I am yet to see a partner that is willing to spend all of the time to integrate the different endpoint solutions and different point solutions for all of these things. The price also gets very high. So one concept that you have seen Satya talking a lot about during the past months is the notion of helping customers to do more with less. And we are convinced that customers, especially during these times, can do more with less using technology. And the way for SMBs to use technology to do more with less is to go the route of the suite with Business Premium together with partner services. And the partner services is really the key to help them unlock and give them the opportunity to focus on their business and sort of handing off the IT concerns to their partner that has the expertise to do so. So for solutions, we have two different portfolios. First, we have the portfolio built for customers with less than 300 users, which has the Hero SKUs Business Premium and now also the Defender for Business standalone SKU. For customers with more than 300 users, we of course position the enterprise portfolio, leading with Microsoft 365 in E3 and E5. So today we're going to focus on how to have a customer conversation on security. We have mapped out these slides to match perfectly with Defender for Business and Business Premium, since that is the consistent feedback that we have gotten, that's the biggest installed base from partners. But if you are to have a customer conversation, these slides also map in well with having a conversation on, for instance, Microsoft 365 E3 with the E5 security add-on. So we're actually going to get started, but I wanted to, before we sort of go into the different customer scenarios, I actually wanted to talk to you a bit about Microsoft Defender for Business. And again, Microsoft Defender for Business is actually Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. It is essentially the same value proposition. The only difference is its packaging and, of course, the price that we sell it to SMB customers. When we think about Microsoft Defender for Business, it is really a product that is built to elevate SMB customer security. And we have sort of 5 key pillars in the value proposition of MDB. And one very common question that I get is, what is the difference between MDB and an antivirus? And I think walking through the value proposition actually starts to explain that. Because the first thing that MDB will do is around threat and vulnerability management. And this is all about building the right security foundation to actually prevent threats from or attacks from happening in the first place. Attack surface reduction is about reducing the number of places that your devices and your applications are vulnerable for attacks. And then only in the third pillar, which is next generation protection, do we sort of start to bring in antivirus and anti-malware protection. But then we don't stop there, because if you think about it, antivirus and anti-malware only relies on known threats. We are basing this protection on the notion that we have seen the threat before, we have sort of registered it, and now we can recognize it in the future. But I'm sure that everybody on this call knows the threat around, for instance, behavioral-based attacks. That doesn't include malware at all. We have also seen a lot more zero-day attacks. So sort of relying on the notion that you will know every threat that will emerge, I think that's definitely naive in this security landscape. Endpoint detection and response take this one step further, and it actually moves away from the anti-malware and antivirus protection to also bring that behavioral-based component. In auto investigation and remediation, we're also able to examine alerts for you and actually take action to remove threats from your environments. And then one thing that has been important within MDB has also been to build in the right APIs and integrations so that you as a partner can continue to use the existing security reporting that you are using. So one of the things that we have seen when we talk to customers about security, and I think that MDB is a perfect example of this, because it is actually, when we think about Business Premium, it has values that is easier to talk to customers about. MDB and MDE is a product that is very technical, and we have seen that the kind of pitch that I just did does not really resonate with customers. They don't really care about what attack surface reduction is, and how we can sort of reduce the attack surface. That's just not something that customers, at least BDMs, resonate with. So on our end, we have been thinking, how can we put security in a perspective that actually resonates with business decision makers? And we have built an analogy that is based on how you would protect a building. Imagine an office building or a house. And we have sort of put MDB into that perspective. So I'm actually going to walk you through, because this will hopefully also spark some ideas on how we can think about other areas where you can sort of apply analogies, because one feedback that we keep on getting is the relatability of security for customers to really understand the value that they're getting. So let's start, and let's think about threat and vulnerability management from the perspective of a building. So imagine that you have a house, you have some damage in one of the corners, and this damage is visible. So you call a building inspector that is more of a generalist, works in your building, and he shows up to take a look. So if this was MDB, then MDB would show up at your environment. It would take a look at the immediate damage, but we wouldn't stop there. We would also sort of walk around the rest of the building structure or your IT environment and take a look. And besides the immediate damage that was clearly visible to the naked eye, there was also things that weren't visible that we needed to take action on. And we will recommend repairs for this. And this can be in the form of, for instance, patching devices, making sure that we don't have any malicious applications, like all of those basic things. And this is what threat and vulnerability management really does. And here you can see sort of a snapshot of the dashboard where you can see important things like, for instance, the customer's exposure score, configuration score, severity distribution. And by the way, if you're using Lighthouse, you will see this in an aggregated view too. So you will see this across your customers, which is a huge value add as well for you as a partner. So it will help to give you at least continuous real-time discovery. You will get sort of context-aware prioritization to understand where to spend your time. And we also have the built-in end-to-end remediation process to sort of support the process. So that's the first step. Then we move into attack surface reduction. And here you can equal it to more of a security professional. The previous building inspector was more of a generalist. This is more of a security professional that also inspects the building structure and recommends appropriate repairs. And here we actually saw that we had two issues. We didn't have lock on our windows, and Windows is also a place where intruders can get in. And there was also this thing about keys, where we had given keys to our relatives and friends, and they could come and go to our office building as they wanted, while they really didn't work at the office. So that didn't make much sense. And this is the same within your IT structure, making sure that the right people have the right access at the right time. And also making sure that you have the right locks in place. And locking the front door is indeed a good idea, but it's not the only way to get in. So this is what attack surface reduction also does. It helps to protect against risks by reducing the surface area of attack. So for instance, 3 things that we will work with you on is system hardening. We will always take customization into consideration. And also visualization is something that is very important. And visualization and helping you as a partner to show the value that you're bringing to customers is something that we will also continue to think about in this product in the future. Next gen protection is, like we talked about, antivirus and anti-malware protection, and also helping to bring that sort of behavioral-based component with endpoint detection and response as well. And when we think about endpoint detection and response in this building analogy, you can equal it to almost turning on surveillance cameras everywhere. Imagine that now you're equipping your building with surveillance cameras. You can see everything that is going on in your environment at any time. And imagine that now that we have all of these things in place, someone actually breaks into our building. So we have a thief that actually breaks into a window and enters the building. Then we will immediately be turning on the cameras or monitor what they're doing. We will sort of follow every step that they're taking, and everything is recorded. And we will also be able to have an alarm sound go off, or in the case of IT, you as a partner will see a notification and alerts coming up on this. And this is what endpoint detection and response does. So bringing behavioral-based real-time protection to detect and investigate advanced and also persistent attacks. We will have manual response action for instance, device or file, and live response to gain access to devices, for instance. Then when we think about automatic investigation and response, this is an area where we also take action to resolve attacks for you. So imagine we have a direct line to the police, and the police is able to show up in super fast time and apprehend the thief. And then we're also able to sort of play back the whole scene and everything that just happened to see how did the thief actually get in, what were the steps that the thief took to get into our building, and how can we sort of prevent that from happening in the future. So that is obviously a huge difference from an antivirus. So when we compare this value proposition to many antivirus solutions, it is just completely comparing apples and pears. And what is also different with MDB is that all of these things also helps you as a partner to build a managed service. For instance, taking all of the steps in the first two areas, for instance, attack surface reduction, that can be a managed service in itself. Bringing surveillance and monitoring, that can be a service in itself. So there's just so many things that you can think about building into MDB. We also have an important perspective and sort of thinking about where the industry is going in the future. We have seen the emergence of a lot of security frameworks, for instance, the NIST framework. And when we think about sort of why these frameworks are important, it is also important to think about covering these four areas: identify, protect, detect and respond, and recover. Because the frameworks, they're different frameworks in different geos, but they pretty much all talk about these four steps. And by the way, the same goes for cybersecurity insurance. So many cybersecurity insurers won't actually accept you as a customer unless you span across these four areas. And Microsoft Defender for Business is considered a leader in both the Gartner Magic Quadrants and also in the IDC MarketScape Quadrant, because one of the reasons is because that we are able to protect against these four pillars. And David, you have also thought about an analogy for this, sort of why we should adopt frameworks. So would you like to speak a bit to that and how we should think about this in the relation of our building?
Sure. And there's really two ways I like to think about frameworks, sort of at a high level. I like to think of a framework like sort of as a blueprint or a roadmap. Many times partners will get a lot of somewhat confusing information from folks, and it's hard to know which vendor is maybe telling the right thing. So, but if you look at a map is vendor agnostic, and if the map is going to the same location or shows the same set of directions, that someone just told you, you can sort of trust that, okay, these people are telling me something that is valid. And the other thing I like to think about, specifically related to our house, is that the frameworks bring structure and order to the security equation. And so if you ever notice, if you go into a house and a building and it's nice and clean, you can sort of expect as you go through the building or enter rooms, you'll find things you expect in the right places. And it's relatively easy to navigate and get stuff done in that home. But if you go into a house or a building and it's just a complete mess, there's stuff piled up everywhere, it's rickety, there's like a mountain of stuff propped up by an umbrella and a vacuum cleaner and a table leg, you can tell that it's disorderly, and you don't know. It probably means that even if the people that are in there now didn't create it, no one wants to touch it because they know one move and that umbrella is going to fall and the whole thing's going to fall down. So it's probably been neglected, but these frameworks also help bring order to that. It's just a standard structured approach to dealing with securities that help rationalize decision making, and kind of would be the same approach as a team of people coming in to clean up the mess. They've got a plan and they can start addressing things with confidence and not have to worry about upsetting the mess too much.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, because I think almost all partners on this call can relate to getting a customer that is afraid to touch areas of their environment because they don't really know what will happen, and also maybe the person that built it left and now nobody knows how it works. So I think that's that's also an important perspective to consider. But I wanted to quickly show the Gartner Magic Quadrants, because we have been on a security journey for the past years, and thinking about all of the progress that have been made over the past years is really amazing. We have gone from being in a more challenging position to now being actually the leader in the 5 core security Gartner Magic Quadrants. And this is for the sort of 5 overarching security categories. Then when it comes to endpoint protection in specific, we are actually considered the only leader in the IDC MarketScape. And as I said, one of the core reasons that we are considered a leader here is because we are adhering to these 4 steps, which many of the competitors that you will see in, for instance, the major player bucket does not meet. So now we're going to go into the broader customer conversation. I think this is a great framework if you just want to land an endpoint conversation, which I think can be the most tricky one given the nature of the product. But we also want to make sure that we expand and have a customer conversation on business premium as well. And on business premium, what we have seen working really well when it comes to landing the security value is to discuss with the customer in terms of challenges and solutions. Because then you also have the opportunity to use these slides as sort of a backdrop for the conversation and also ask the customer questions in relation to the slide. And both me and David have done this with customers, and we have found that the slides really also spark a very nice discussion. So we highly recommend using this. And David, I'm going to bring you into the conversation so that we can talk through a little bit of how we would do it with customers. Now it's obviously just the two of us, but just so that you can get a sense of how we would talk to it. And for this purpose, we also have our fictive company, Northwind Traders, that we will focus on. So David, unauthorized access to work data, that's a very common issue that we hear about from customers. And I have even heard about customers and partners having access to old employers' data way after they quit that company. So it's common even in the IT industry. So how should customers think about this?
Yep, good question. I mean, there's two things I recommend partners look at. First, if your customer is already concerned and aware, they are concerned about unauthorized access to work data, either by prior employees or people outside the organization, then I would quickly start bringing up features like sensitivity labels, which are easy to use, both on mobile and endpoint devices. They're included in Microsoft 365 Business Premium. I also recommend talking about advanced identity controls like Azure AD Premium that make sure the person accessing data is who they say they are with MFA. That works really, really well because the features are amazing. They work extremely well. They work cross-platform. Now, if the customer if they think their data isn't important, I start asking questions about the data. What would happen if a former employee had access to all the customer lists and was working for a customer now? Things like that. Or what would happen if employee records got in the hands of someone that shouldn't have that? We'll usually start getting the customer thinking about, maybe I should protect my data and make sure that I have control. Because in many small businesses, they've relied on the trust and integrity of everybody that worked there, which is great. I love trusting people. But most business owners would agree they'd rather actually have control and not have to rely on trust, so that the trust they have is an add-on benefit and not the sole thing keeping their data in the hands of people who shouldn't have it.
That makes sense. Another common challenge that we hear about is phishing attacks. And I think there's starting to become the notion that phishing attacks is actually something that we should consider more important. Way back a couple of years ago, we could pretty easily see the difference between a phishing email and a regular email. But now it's getting really harder with many of these attackers doing a lot of research, really finding out like where you work, what you like, and really scouting around on social media to find out a way to sort of appeal to you. So how can partners and customers think about this?
So, if you're on this call, you probably already know phishing is really important, right? The sheer scale and sophistication of email-borne attacks has changed dramatically. It is no longer easy to tell between a phish and regular email. And the most concerning are highly targeted phishing attacks, where the threat actor actually knows a lot about the business, and they become actually aware of who the customers are and maybe even pretend to be a specific customer or something like that. So they're really sophisticated, handcrafted attacks. We need to do something about this. And fortunately, Defender for Office 365 P1 is included in Business Premium. So we get a number of things that will help us. Number one is that all links that come through documents and in email are rewritten. So they're checked every time they're clicked, so that someone can't send in, a legitimate looking document with hyperlinks in it and then change the payload later after network scanners have done their thing. The second bit that's really important is that all executable malware, this is macros and script-based files that come in through email or shared on Teams and OneDrive, are also detonated in Sandbox, and their behavior is analyzed not only for what it does, but for what it doesn't do. We look for things like people trying to obfuscate code and stuff in that content. And the third and probably the most important piece is the anti-phishing or the anti-impersonation technology. We use artificial intelligence to discover people's email patterns on a per user basis, and then we certainly look for patterns of obvious phish. We also look for patterns of like someone asking for something that seems out of context or appropriate or inappropriate. So for example, if Emmy asks something from me, we talk all the time. She's always asking for stuff and always delivering, hopefully. All right, that's pretty normal. But if our CEO all of a sudden asks me for something, that's unusual, and the phishing engine will kind of pick up on that and warn me about it, and then also raise the alert level for my mailbox because it's concerning behavior. That's not so easy to pick up just from basic anti-phish scanning. And I wanted to add, solving phish and spam is one of the most important things to do for a customer, or most, if the email's not under control, you're going to have no end of complaints. So it's one of the first things I recommend partners get a handle on. And we've written a guide to do it, so we can make it easier to get the email under control for your customers if it's not already there.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the things that actually lands the best with customers. Like asking the customer, wouldn't it feel nice for you to know that if an employee clicks on a link, you don't have to worry because it will be scanned in a sandbox environment. So when somebody makes a mistake, it actually won't be detrimental to your business. And I think just getting that peace of mind, it's hard to put a price on that, and giving them also the power back in a sense. Because if you have all of your employees with ability to click on malicious links, potentially with ransomware or malware, you're also putting a lot of pressure on your employees to do the right thing. And there might be a time where somebody is stressed and they are not able to see the difference and they accidentally click. And that is also a big responsibility to put on your employees. So we also have accidental loss or data breach, which I think is an interesting one, because I think when it comes to data loss, the sense is that it is happening because of a breach, but actually the most common scenario is that employees accidentally send the data to the wrong place. Like for instance, instead of sending it to David, my colleague, I send it to David, like a customer or someone external that I've worked with, and just send it too fast simply. That's a very common scenario. So how can customers think about this?
I think this is one of the areas that's often overlooked in many SMBs. Is the accidental data loss or breach. So with Business Premium, we include a number of technologies that can help with this. The simplest and most basic is data loss prevention, which is a technology that will prevent things like easily identifiable content that normally shouldn't be shared externally. That's either via email or sharing with OneDrive. Patterns of like credit card numbers and personally identifiable information. So that's one thing. It's included in the product. Someone tries to send an email with something that looks like a credit card number, we can warn them or block it outright. And it's we're looking for more than just a 16-digit number. Like for example, the way that detection engine works, it does look for the regular expression of 16 numbers in close proximity to each other. But then we'll also look and see do those 16 numbers compute via algorithm to a check digit, because that we can. Any random 16 numbers doesn't necessarily mean a credit card number. If Visa, Discover, MasterCard is also in proximity of that number, that raises our confidence level. The other thing we have is data classification with labels and encryption, so that we give tools for our customer to classify their data so they can place rules on it. For example, if they want to classify something as confidential, we give them that ability. We give them the ability to put rules around, the external sharing of that confidential data. And if they want to take it up a step, we can also automatically mark documents with the word confidential, either as a header or watermark, and encrypt the contents so that only the intended recipients are able to open it, even if it does escape the company's team share or something like that.
Makes sense. And I think this is also something where the protection actually follows the document. So even if you send a document, you can feel very safe that only the right people can actually open it, which again, I think gives you a lot of peace of mind. And then we have work data on personal devices, which is also a common challenge. And one thing that I often hear from partners is that Either you manage the device all in, or the employee or the customer brings personal devices, and then you sort of have no control over the data. But there is actually a middle ground. David, would you like to speak to this a bit?
Sure, love to. So yeah, we have complete management suite for mobile devices like iPhones, Androids, tablets, etc. And for devices the company owns, we can fully manage them. But when it's an employee's personal device, gets a little bit odd. Many employees don't want the company to fully manage the device, and many companies don't want to really have access to something they shouldn't necessarily have access to, like an employee's personal messages between their family and stuff like that, right? They don't want to have access to it just to avoid, any kind of problem there. So we have a great technology called mobile app management, where we put the security at the app layer. So when this is turned on, in order for the app to connect to the tenant and access data, it must be a supported app. They can't just use any app. And then we can put the security protection on the app itself, so that the app will enforce our rules and say, it'll block, for example, copy paste to personal locations. So if someone has their work email, and it's a sensitive email or work document, we can just we can require that it stays stored with the company's Teams or OneDrive and can't be copied off to other locations. And also, any of the work data that's on the personal device can be wiped at any time, either by disabling the user's account or selectively wiping the data. And even in apps that can do both personal and work data, let's say the Outlook app, which can connect to a personal email box and the company one, when the data is wiped, only the company data is removed. So the user can continue with any of their personal data, and the selective wipe won't have any impact on it whatsoever.
Yeah, I think that's a good value as well. One of the things that I will point out before we move on to the next section is that while me and David sort of ran through this section quite fast, usually what we would recommend to do when you're actually sitting with customers is to have a proper hour or at least 45 minutes to talk through this section only, so that you can ask the customer questions, you can have a discussion with your customers, and then sort of have a proper discussion on the challenge and make it specific to that specific customer before you move into the solution. That is where we have seen the slides working really well. So that is what we would recommend. What we would like to spend time on now is a bit of objection handling, because we have collected the most common objections that we have heard from you as partners on what you hear from your customers, and we are going to make an attempt to help you handle them in this section. So the first common objection that we hear all the time is that customers already have an antivirus solution. Imagine you are contacting a customer that has Business Basic or Business Standard. High chances are that they're going to have some sort of antivirus. We actually see from our research in developed markets, 90% of customers own some sort of security solution. So this is very likely going to happen. So then the customer naturally will ask, why do I need to invest in additional security? And I think this is an area that is very interesting, because it also relates back to the discussion that we had on MDB, where we talked about the notion about relying on known threats, for instance, with antivirus solutions, versus really moving to the more advanced security protection, where we move away from that and have ability to really improve visibility and response time to attacks, and also stop emerging threats with also behavioral-based protection. You also have the ability to contain malicious activity, which you don't really have with an antivirus solution. With an antivirus solution, if the threat that you are encountering is not known to the antivirus, or if it's simply not a malware, then there is simply nothing that the solution can do. David, this is also something that you have talked about a lot, and I know that you also have heard this objection a lot of times.
Yep, and this is an important objection to overcome. Because, if I look back 10 years ago, you could make the argument an SMB antivirus was enough, because most of the attacks were, limited to one computer and wouldn't impact the entire business. The reality is that, number one, antivirus is not full protection. There's many things that it cannot protect from, no matter how good the antivirus is. The confusing bit is much of the same language you hear from antivirus vendors. is very similar to the security language that you hear from EDR vendors and whatnot, and it's hard for customers to differentiate the two. So I recommend go back to the analogy. Imagine you're protecting your business and you lock the door and you leave for the evening. If you have nothing else, it's actually quite simple, no matter how good your lock is, for a thief to come and break the lock. There's not many locks that can withstand a crowbar. And if you have such a lock on the front door, they can go to the back door with their crowbar or through a window or whatever, right? So you need the security alarm system, etc. But the other key point to remember is that the nature of the attacks have changed. It used to be that phishing and malware and viruses were more of an annoyance than a business disruptor. The reality is that today the cyber criminals have figured out that, number one, that the business itself is very important to the owner. So their method of attack is typically over a longer duration where it's targeted, and they're specifically trying to get around the endpoint protection on every single device, and they take their time if they can do this successfully, so that when they're ready to launch, whether it's ransomware or other type of attack, they completely disable the business, and it's designed to completely disrupt the business so that they can extort the owner for the maximum amount of value. That's what's changed. And so just having protection at an AV level is simply not sufficient, and it's not prudent. It's much cheaper and more effective to get ahead of that, put in proper protection so that the business isn't, as likely to be at the mercy of someone trying to extort them.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think one of the things that, and you touched upon that, but one of the things that has really changed is the commoditization of attacks, really. I mean, it's very easy for someone to simply buy the ransomware or the malware online and simply launch an attack. And I think that the barrier to do this has really, really decreased. That's why the amount of attacks have increased so much. And also, it's no longer individual people doing this. It's full-blown operations with, in the same way that we have you as a partner, us as Microsoft, Ingram, we all have businesses to help protect customers. There are businesses to do the opposite. And I think that's where the change has also happened, and why we have so many of these, which we didn't have before. Then I think another point that is important to discuss with customers is around layered security. And that sort of relates back also to the building analogy, because obviously before we used to rely on how to protect your environment with building a strong protection. And then if somebody came through that protection, we really had nothing more to offer. Now we're starting to think more along the lines of zero trust. And zero trust is really about moving away from the notion that you will never be breached and starting to think about at some point, probably I will be breached. And then how will I be able to handle that? How will I identify the threat? How will I bounce back from it? And that's what zero trust is all about. So it's about, instead of having one big protection, to have protection layers across your different areas. For instance, making sure that when somebody, for instance, a user logs into your company network, that you know that this person is who they say that they are, with, for instance, features like MFA, to have identity security in place. Then making sure that you have the device security in place, for instance, with Defender for Business. Then the application layer, to make sure that, for instance, users cannot copy-paste the company information to a private application. And then finally, document security, to make sure that you protect the sensitive data that you have. When we think about bringing zero trust, and zero trust is something that our enterprise customers is adopting, it's something that we as Microsoft are adopting. And when we think about bringing zero trust to SMBs, it is Microsoft 365 Business Premium that has the scale and the functionality to do that. So I also think that bringing this conversation, if the customer is ready to start moving to Business Premium, can also be very powerful. David, let me know if you have something to add here, but I think the layered security approach is something that usually resonates very well with customers as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's really important. Another way to look at the layered security approach is to look at like the CIS controls framework. It's another one that Business Premium maps to really well. You can solve quite a bit of that control set, and that is proven to be effective. When breaches are analyzed, they're usually analyzed in context to existing cybersecurity framework. In almost all cases, successful breaches are based on the lapse of the most simple controls. So having layered security, either in this view or taking another view of like an industry standard control framework, is a great approach to security. Sort of open your customers' awareness to see that they don't want to just focus on one area or shore up one area they may have heard about in the news. You want to have a broad area of coverage that ties into zero trust, because hackers don't try one thing and quit. They try one thing, and if that fails, they keep moving on. They're probing the business for areas of weakness. And if they find an area of weakness, they're most likely going to exploit that. So taking the layered approach or using a framework is a way to sort of have no single area of weakness. You sort of thought of everything you could and put protection in place across multiple areas, so that at least we're preventing most of the problems that are possible. And then if a problem occurs, we know about it, so we can do something about it before an attacker has time to really cause a problem.
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. Sorry about that. One of the things that I'm also asked by partners is why to consider, for instance, the CIS controls versus one of the other security frameworks.
Yeah, it's a common question. And the reason I like CIS is because, one, I participate in that control set in the framework as a contributor, but it's also, I found it just very approachable for SMBs. It's that's why I like it. Now it's very compatible with other frameworks, so it's much easier for me to just pick one and focus on it. But if someone tells me, well, I need to use NIST 853, which is another control framework, they're very compatible with each other. I'm not going to say one is better than the other, but if you have a requirement for that, well, of course, use that. However, if you've implemented CIS, you've completed most of the other one anyway. And there will be some differences you have to focus on, but by and large, these things are compatible with each other. Some do more or less than the others. So my starting point is generally CIS, and then I'll choose others as needed.
Yeah, because then some of the work has pretty much been done for you, right? Because then CIS is based on many of the others.
Yeah, CIS is based on the NIST cybersecurity framework, or program framework, exactly. And then, these things, the differences usually relate to which country we're operating in, and maybe perhaps which industry. A lot of them have specific requirements that meet those specific geographic obligations or specific industry requirements.
Yeah, I think that's a good feedback. So, moving on to the next objection, which I think is another very common one that pretty much all partners are facing, is customers that have Business Basic or Business Standard, and they are not sure why they should pay more for Microsoft 365 Business Premium.
Yeah, the great one, Business Basic and Business Standard are productivity suites. They have some security features, but they're not a security solution, right? So if I take a basic standard customer and map it to the same industry framework, I can only solve a very tiny portion of that control set. So I still need to go pay for something else to solve the rest of the control set. Meanwhile, if I take Business Premium at $22, I can solve probably about 80% of the control set. And it's actually cheaper to use Business Premium in that context than it is anything else. So that's one of the ways I sort of work that in, sort of customers thinking, oh, Business Standard, has everything I need and I'm secure. They're probably not looking at their business holistically, the security needed for their business holistically.
Yeah, I think
that's here on this slide is the difference between standard and premium is the security capabilities.
Yeah, exactly. And the security features list is quite extensive as well. One of the things that I wanted to highlight for you as partners is that we also have upsell guides. So if you have customers that are using Business Basic or Business Standard and you're trying to position Business Premium to them, then we have upsell guides to clearly position what extra value that customer gets, how you as a partner can lead the conversation. So I strongly recommend to check out these upsell guides for partners as well. Then one common objection for Defender for Business is, does it really bring new capabilities to Business Premium?
Sure. And I think a lot of customers will look at this and they're sort of comparing, they're oftentimes thinking, they hear the pitch for Defender for Business and it sounds like antivirus to them. So I sort of emphasize, number one, that, hey, this is much more than antivirus. It's threat and vulnerability management, where that by itself is, probably the most valuable component in there, and that's all about preventing problems. But we're adding the security cameras and the alarm systems that kind of go along with EDR as well. And then here's a comparison chart for anyone who's familiar with our enterprise product MDEP2 to show how closely the Defender for Business maps for MDEP2. We've only scaled back 2 features. One is the 6 months retention of raw data, right? Raw benign data. This is sort of the security camera footage. We do keep data related to incidents for 6 months, but we don't store like all the data, which are generally designed for a cybersecurity professional to go and have a second look and make sure that they're looking for things and like the needle in the haystack that MDE or MDB didn't catch. And the other bit is that we don't give access to threat experts to come in and take a look at your customers' environments directly, like someone from Microsoft having a look. That's only included in the MDE P2 plan.
Yeah, so we're really bringing E5 capabilities to SMB. And this is sort of the second instance where we have clearly brought E5 capabilities to the Business Premium suite. I think the other example is when we brought Defender for Office 365 into Business Premium, which was also a huge value add. And we will continuously do this. We will always examine the threat levels towards SMBs, and we will map in what features and what requirements do we have for Business Premium. Because the idea is very much that this solution should be the hero SKU for SMBs, and we do this constant evaluation all the time. And we have brought a ton of value over the past years, where we constantly see new threats and new needs from customers. So that is also a commitment from our side. I also wanted to show the pre-MDB and then with MDB in terms of endpoint security. And here we have really listed out the different value in MDB. And each of these are packed with value. For instance, threat and vulnerability management. You can do a lot of services there. Endpoint detection and response, network protection, attack surface reduction. Each of these are packed with value. So the value that we have added to Business Premium, I heard one partner say that using MDB and even adding in Azure Sentinel doubles the value of Business Premium. So that's sort of the sentiment of how you can really increase the value of Business Premium using the endpoint protection part of it. And then usually we get a question as well on cross-platform, because all the customers might not be using, let's say, Windows devices. So how do we think about cross-platform?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point, is that, when folks have thought about Microsoft Defender or Antivirus products in the past, it was typically only available for Windows and user devices. Now we cover Windows devices, Mac OS devices, Linux servers, Windows servers, iOS tablets and phones, Android tablets and phones. So we really have a good broad coverage. And then this extends not just to the antivirus protection, but to the EDR components as well as the threat and vulnerability management. So if you have customers that are using, primarily Mac OS, we can do a very good job, not just of protecting them, but we also have our management suite and Business Premium that can manage those devices and make sure they're configured appropriately, have the right apps, policies, etc. on them as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think we have time for one last customer objection. So the last objection that we will cover today is whether Microsoft 365 Business Premium really is cost competitive.
Yeah, and it's a great question. But it really is, and one way to look at it, I like to look at is sort of against what I would do if I'm solving for the CIS, the very basic form of that framework, the minimum baseline for security, is that M365 Business Premium coming in at $22 per month in the US is covering quite a bit of that, or most of it actually. I've yet to find any solution out there, any combination of products that can do that in any modicum of form that's less. It's typically double. Right. And this is a fairly conservative view of that, because I've seen other solutions that are even more than double when we're trying to solve for, the framework. We still need our MFA. We still need document encryption. We still need a number of things. And so that if the customer doesn't have Business Premium, they really have left with two choices: pay more for a bunch of other stuff that's hard to integrate, or start, pulling back and giving up on critical security features that we have an overwhelming amount of data that shows that we need that, because customers who don't have it, end up at a fairly high risk of having problems in that area. So that's one way I like to look at it. And then, if someone still is objecting, I kind of put up to them. I said, well, in the list of capability, which don't we need, right? Or which are we willing to pay more for? And that usually gets at least gets the customer on board with the idea. of business premium being cost competitive. They still may choose to do other things. They still may choose to pay more, but at least now we're in a position of strength at being, the cost-effective cost leader.
I think that's a great point. So to close out, we wanted to leave you with some next steps. We have additional training. So you heard David talking, for instance, about cybersecurity frameworks, and we have actually a technical series that we have been driving from a Microsoft perspective, where David and actually together with a partner and with a partner representative called Alex, they talk a lot about how to think about these frameworks and how to get started with them. So we will put the link in the chat so that you can attend that if you would like. We also have different kinds of GTM programs that you can participate in. We have our SMB workshop program, where we now have Defender for Business, Windows 365, and Teams Essentials workshops too. We also have the CDX demo portal for you as a partner to use to do customer demos. We also currently are running a sales contest, and we have recently added in a business premium to that mix as well. And I will put the link to the sales contest as well in the chat. And the first 100 partners to sell at least 150 seats of MDB or Business Premium until the end of March will be rewarded a trip to Mallorca in Spain for a customized training experience. So it's a really exciting contest. I will give you all of the links needed below. And I will hand it back to Brianna to close us out.
Thank you, Emmy. So just sharing my slide here. We know that building a cybersecurity practice can be a very risky practice for some partners that in moving their business to, and depending on your maturity level, we have different routes to support our partners dependent on their gaps today, right? So spanning from service augmentation to managed support and partner development. However, given the time, I'd encourage you take a screenshot of this value proposition statement as to how we can help you grow your cybersecurity practice using elements of helping you do it through service augmentation, managing it for you through MDR providers on our cloud marketplace, setting you up for success through programmatic efforts we call our Security Expert Program, and helping you train your team through certifications in an exclusive partnership with Pluralsight to offer on-demand training to help you get vendor certifications like Microsoft, as well as agnostic certifications like CompTIA. So what I want to quickly talk about before we close this call is one value proposition that I'd love for our partners on this call to really take advantage of, and that is utilizing our Center of Excellence team to deliver quick scan, half-day cybersecurity assessments of your existing customers. I noticed in the chat, David, you mentioned that many customers are mostly unaware of how many vulnerable apps or misconfigured devices, et cetera, that they have. And this scan is exactly the type of flashlight that you need as a partner to help your customers uncover that dark corner and look at kind of the dirt or the vulnerabilities that they have in their existing on-premises as well as cloud infrastructure. And so we actually have a Center of Excellence team worldwide that can deliver these scans on behalf of you as a partner to your customers in English, in Spanish, as well as German. And I would encourage you to use our team to see how you can use a cybersecurity assessment as an easy pre-sales tool to deliver that security expertise with your customer, and look at leveraging an upsell conversation by pointing at existing gaps that are real to your customer and how they can build out that 60, 90, 120-day journey with security functionalities in a Microsoft Business Premium SKU, for example. So I'd like to leave that there. I'll give you the link as to how you can book your free cybersecurity assessment, but I think this is the best first foray into how Ingram can support you as a partner. I'd like to thank our guests. Emmy, David, thank you so much for spending the time to go through in detail the sales-focused lens of how to deliver security with Microsoft. We do have a lot of other webinars within our series of seamless security content to help partners deliver and build a strategic cybersecurity practice. So I encourage you to stay registered for our upcoming webinar sessions on March 20th, April 5th, and April 20th, going into the technical, going into the cybersecurity assessments, and as well bringing in partners to talk about how they themselves built that business so that you can use them as a best practice to build it yourself in-house. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. We will answer some of the questions that we have left on the Q&A chat, but we really appreciate your time. Thank you all so much.
Great session. Thank you. Bye.